You are listening to Scribble Talk Teaching, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and I'll be sitting down with our industry veterans to dive deep into the topics that business-winning professionals like you can use to help grow your skills and your business. Today's guest is Marina Goren. Marina is the President and Chief Exec of Smart BD Consulting, a successful capture and business development firm based in the federal government area. Over the past 8.5 years, she has successfully grown her company to over 180 consultants, serving over 70 plus federal government contracting clients, winning over $20 billion worth of projects. She also teaches numerous proposal development and capture courses and is a regular speaker with the APMP community. More about Marina in Scribble Talk episode number 22. Today we'll be talking about solutioning magic, no fluff, only bluff, bottom line, up front. So welcome to Scribble Talk Teaching, Marina. Good to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Topic: solutioning magic, no fluff, only bluff, bottom line up front. Talk us through, what does it mean?
Sure, absolutely. So this is actually one of my personal biggest pet peeves, what I call the fluffy proposals. And unfortunately, it's a pretty common phenomenon that I see quite a bit. And I'm trying to always consult and strategize and help my clients get away from the fluffy proposals. And what I mean by the fluffy proposals is a lot of proposal professionals come in and they can put together a very well-polished, well-written product that speaks to a lot of benefits and reads really well. But when you finish reading it, and if I ask you a question, what is it really that we are proposing? What is the solution? You can't answer that question because it's not in there. It's everything else but the meat, right? Now, I will also tell you, and we can get a little bit more in depth as we go along, I've also read the opposite proposals, right? And it's less common in my experience, but it's equally disadvantageous to the bidder, where you do have a lot of what I call the meat. You have a lot of technical jargon, you have a lot of technical details, but you're not describing to the customer, why is it important to them? Why would they want to buy this service or product or solution? And so those types of proposals are equally a disadvantage, right? So the goal, the winning proposals, in my experience, the truly winning proposals that take first place, it's marrying both. It's having, what I call the meaty technical solution, very tangible, whether it's services or approaches and methodologies or products or solutions architected for that client or combination thereof, together with why should this client care about that, the benefits, right? It's the marriage of those two things together is really what makes a winning proposal.
Totally, Marina. What a start in this one. Marina, I think solution is a much broader term, right? We are so used to, here is an RFP, write a response to an RFP, and then we all write a response to an RFP. Suddenly, somebody comes and tells, "Hey, what is the solution we are proposing?" And people are like, "Hey, we have done the proposal. We will score high." So, what is the solution, Marina? From your opinion, why is it important?
Sure. So I will try to come up with an example. I know your audience is very broad, right? They're probably spanning across multiple markets. So instead of using, a software development example or an IT example or a systems engineering example or a facilities example, trying to appease or help understand a portion of the audience. I'm going to use a very simplistic everyday example that any human pretty much can relate to. Let's say you wanted to hire a catering company to cater, let's say you were throwing a party at your home and you really wanted to impress your guests. And you wanted them to come and set up some tables and tablecloths and bring some dishes. And then, of course, cook the meal and serve the meal to your party of 25 very special guests, right? So you have contacted, let's say, 3 companies, and they're putting their proposals together. So company 1, as an example, proposes, absolutely beautiful settings, stunning dishes, beautiful design, guaranteed to impress all of your guests. They're going to serve mouth-watering dishes and plenty of them. They are going to provide top-notch service, white glove equivalent to 5+ star hotels and restaurants. So all of your guests walk away completely impressed by your hospitality and the level of party that you can organize and put forth in your home. Not only will they decorate your home, they will offer your guests the meal of their lifetime with a service to top it off. Okay, so that's proposal number 1. Do you like that? So again, remember, your goal is to put together a very memorable party and to really impress your guests, right? Would you like that? Would you like what I just described? Would you want to go forward with that and purchase that? Does that sound good to you? It does, right? I mean, it kind of goes along with your goals. I mean, it doesn't say anything bad, right? Correct?
Correct, Marina. I'm actually hungry after you just explained about the food, but that's okay. But the
glad to hear. And then funny, well, I'm not sure what time it is over there, but I know we're in different time zones, but it is kind of getting to lunchtime here. I didn't plan this quite right. So if you see me drooling later on, apologies ahead. It is lunchtime here. So having said that, can you tell me what it is that, I just proposed to you? Like, for example, what's the menu? Like, what are we serving? How many people are we going to serve this to? What colors are going to be the tablecloths? Can you tell me anything about this proposal? You said you liked it. It makes your mouth water. You're hungry. What did I just propose to you?
Yeah, it just touched.
You know what I'm saying?
it didn't touch anything objective, but it just touched all the emotional parts of why I like this proposal.
Yes, but there's nothing tangible, right? There's nothing to score. There's nothing that you can say, I really like, the fact that they're going to be serving both the combination of steak and seafood, so that if some of my guests don't like steak, they have seafood. And oh, by the way, they have vegetarian options for those guests that may not like meat at all. And hey, they're going to make sure they can bring enough food to make for 40 guests. So even though I'm having 25, we're going to have leftovers. And if we have some unannounced guests, they can also accommodate them. Oh, they're going to bring 5 servers with them, and their ratio of server to guest is such and such, therefore making sure they can be attentive to everyone. By the way, I know nothing about hospitality business, so I'm sure none of these numbers make any sense. If there are any listeners that are in that business, they probably think this is ridiculous and sounds, stupid, but this is just a hypothetical example for people to relate to, right? So the point is, they provided no details. So while the proposal may sound extremely attractive, have a ton of benefits, and definitely written to the goals, they know the goals that you're trying to accomplish and achieve. They understand the customer goals. It has no meat, it has no standing. At the end of the day, when you're reading this other proposal with all those details, and you're starting to compare side by side, you may have even liked the first proposal when you first read it, right? But now you have this other one with all the details. Which one really makes you believe they can pull it off? Which one gives you the warm and fuzzy, you're going to get what they promised to deliver?
It's the second one, definitely.
Hands down, right? So that is the whole point, right? We have to figure out how to describe our offering and our solution, along with how that offering and that solution will satisfy the customer goals.
Well said, Marina. But you know what? What you just said really nails down really the core issue in our industry, which is like, as I mentioned, we are so fine-tuned to writing a response to the RFP, but solutions on this set, there is no explicit, like 5 questions that you need to answer to really kind of justify the solution. So how do you kind of bring your solution in a response document, or why is it not in the response document? I say, hey, explain your solution or something. It's never there, right?
Yeah. So I think there are a few reasons why, right? The biggest reason is the lack of subject matter experts. Again, when a lot of folks go write their proposals, and by the way, I'm a big proponent of that. You have to have proposal professionals writing your proposals, right? If you truly want a high quality, well-polished, well-written proposal that the customer opens and gets the professionalism right out of, you have to have proposal professionals write it, produce it, do the graphics, right? But if you're using those folks to package and put together a proposal, by definition, they're not practitioners, right? If they've been doing this for 20, 25 years of their life, even if they started out in the technical field, they've been writing proposals for the last 20, 25 years. They don't do this anymore on a daily basis. They don't know what the latest technologies are out there. They only know what they read or what they hear from subject matter experts, right? They don't have the most recent hands-on experience. They don't have the truly lived lessons learned to draw from, right? Those are practitioners. Those are the subject matter experts. Now, if you look at it in the opposite direction, right? And I have clients that just say, hey, I have all the subject matter experts. I have a contract that does exactly this, but for a different customer. I'm just going to bring them in and write about what they do on a day-to-day basis. That's good. It's a good start, right? But those people, they don't know how to package it, because at the end of the day, proposal is still always a sales document, right? So they know how to talk about the technical details. They don't know how to package it in an attractive package for the customer to want to buy. So it's really important to have both types of folks working your proposal. So why do a lot of proposals end up reading fluffy? So, problem number one, you don't have the subject matter experts, or you don't engage the subject matter experts. I actually have some small business clients that come in and say, hey, do you guys do turnkey proposals? Do you just, for a firm fixed price, we're going to give you a name of the opportunity. We're going to send you the RFP. And essentially, you're going to bring us a full-up proposal. We're going to put our logo on it and submit it. And I said, no, we don't do that, and you don't want us or anyone else to do that for you, because it's never going to be a winning proposal. By definition, my company has a lot of proposal professionals. They're fantastic at packaging and writing and putting together winning bids, but they don't know the work that you guys do. They don't know your capabilities. They don't know your company's solutions. So it has to be a marriage of both for it to be a winning proposal. And so that's I would say, mistake number one is not to bring on the subject matter experts, or to just rely on proposal professionals to put together the entire proposal from scratch. Mistake number two, I would say, if you do have practitioners or subject matter experts, they don't know, very frequently, with some exceptions, they don't know much about writing proposals. They don't know what it's like to be compliant. They don't know what it's like to be responsive to what the RFP is asking for. So if they're an extrovert, and if they know how to talk or write, you're going to have a stream of consciousness from them that may or may not be on the topics that the customer wants to hear. It may be adjacent topics, but it may not be the specific topics, right? So mistake number two is, when you do have people that are technically capable and knowledgeable and have the expertise, you need a good facilitator to help get the information out of them. And you need a good process to capture that information before it gets folded into the proposal. So I would say those are the two most common reasons behind, the meat not getting into the proposal.
Well said, Marina. Because solutioning, as you rightly said, is an art in itself. Because there are lots and lots of structured ways of how to run a kickoff meeting, how to run your proposal template, how to build your content plan, reuse materials. But when it comes to solutioning, that's where it's still an utopian thing, right? I mean, you either get it right or you get it totally wrong. So, so what advice would you give people? Here we go, guys. Solution is not complex. These are the simple 3-4 steps that you could do to really understand what a solution is.
Sure. And so we actually, I actually designed a whole process around that. So number one important part of solutioning is understanding what the customer wants, right? And that goes beyond just reading and interpreting the RFP requirements. That goes to actual understanding what are the customer goals, right? What is their vision 5 years down the road? You know, how do they want to progress? Do they want to just keep the status quo and nothing kind of overturns their boat kind of situation? You know, they risk averse, in which case we need to think about, you know, low risk solution, making sure we can continue down the path they're moving today, capture the knowledge, that type of thing, or build in a lot of risk mitigations and contingencies into our schedules and the risk tables and things like that, right? Or do they want a change, right? If they want a change, what is their end goal? We really need to understand what is the end goal, what is the end state they're trying to get to. Maybe they want to be a leader, a known leader or a center of excellence in a certain technology or something like that. How can we get them there? You know, how can we get them the right expertise, the right tools? What tools are there? How can we build a solution that will position them to be where they need to be? So step number one is you have to understand the customer, right? How does that happen? Well, first and foremost, the best way is customer meetings. There's something that we build that we call voice of the customer. It's a matrix that kind of summarizes at a glance, all of the customer HUD buttons and maps them and groups them by requirements, and eventually maps them to the RFP section, to the RFP requirement sections, right? So that's really, really important. And we do a whole analysis on, for example, the number of keywords that pop up in the customer interviews. So, if the word training and staffing comes up, 20 times across 7 different customers, that's not just a HUD button. That's a very big HUD button. Clearly, it's on a lot of minds. They're worried about, capturing the right skill sets for the future technologies and things like that. They're worried about making sure they can train the existing workforce to be able to implement the technologies of the future, and we have to have some solutions around that as an example, right? So voice of the customer is really important to have. Some people say, well, what if I can't get a meeting with a customer? Not everybody wants to meet. That's very true. There are other sources, right? There are conferences at which the customers speak. You can look at their presentations. You can look at their LinkedIn profiles and their backgrounds and their career paths to understand what was important to them throughout their career path. You can see if they've published articles. You can bring in potential consultants who have interfaced with this customer before in their previous careers and lives. You can bring in subcontractors who have worked with this customer or are working with them now in a different contract. There are all kinds of options and choices that you have to creatively think about. How do you get in the minds of this particular client set to understand what their end goals are? You can read their mission statements, you can read their roadmap plans. There are all kinds of things you can do to get into their way of thinking. So that becomes a baseline upon which you should be solutioning. The second thing is, so I know there are a lot of proposal approaches that do storyboarding and such, and I think the overarching goal behind storyboarding is a really good one, but unfortunately over the years the storyboard templates became so comprehensive and so overbearing that it makes to be an exercise that's more an exercise in compliance than actual thinking out of the box solutioning tool. So what we've developed is what I call solutioning by PowerPoint. So it's a set of PowerPoint slides that we develop against a certain RFP portion or RFP requirements, and it tasks specific questions. So it always starts with, what are the customer HUD buttons on this topic? And it's in a very specific topic, so it's not just general. So for example, if we were doing solutioning on the management approach, it would always start as, what are the customer HUD buttons on the management of this contract? You know, maybe they want to reduce management overhead and streamline and automate how certain things, you know, status reports get processed and things like that, and staffing gets processed and resourcing gets processed, right? Things like that we would capture there as goals. Then we would go on and say, okay, now we have to show how we're going to staff an organization. Next slide is going to be an organizational chart. Or is it one picture, organizational chart, right? The next slide will be roles and responsibilities. Well, let's talk about a day in the life of this organization. You know, who is responsible for this? What do these managers do? Who manages the people? Is it the technical leads, or is it the managers? You know, who manages the budgets? Is it the managers, or is it the task leads? So we walk through and we actually pretend we have this contract and now we're managing this contract. How would we do things on a day-to-day basis? And the whole slide deck is either graphics, which by the way end up in the proposal, so it's not wasted effort, tables, or bullets. And that's really important, because when we're talking through this, we're truly focused on solutions. We're not focused on, you know, how do we write this up in the proposal, or what words do we use? The words are not important. It's the concepts that are important. It's the meat, right? The words can come later, right? So, and the end of each slide deck, which every slide deck is per major topic of the proposal. At the end of each slide deck, we always put a slide that says, what strengths or significant strengths are we targeting with this portion of the proposal? Because vast majority of the proposals are scored via strengths, significant strengths, and of course weaknesses and significant weaknesses, right? So you always want to target and define what those strengths and significant strengths might be, and think about it back when we're solutioning. Another reason this tool is really good is that the next thing a lot of companies do, and we definitely teach that as well, is a lot of people call it a blue team review, basically a solution review, right? So first you bring a team together to brainstorm around the solution itself, then you want a sounding board to take a look at the solutions, right? More senior people, perhaps executives. You want some devil's advocates to try and, you know, poke holes or think of things that you haven't thought of in the solutioning session. You always want to have that review. That PowerPoint deck is a perfect tool for that review, because again, you don't want people boggled down in the choice of words or typos, or do we want to say this word, call us this, or call us that? That's not important at this stage of the game, right? It's like, are we organized correctly? You know, is our organizational structure driving the right messages? You know, we're saying we're a matrix. Is that what the customer really wants? What are the benefits of being matrix, right? So we want to sort of get the people to think at the higher level. And so that's what that PowerPoint slide deck does. And that's the review is an oral, it's a verbal review, right? So you have the facilitator talk through the slides, and reviewers are giving feedback real time verbally, and then somebody has to take notes, of course. So that's the idea of solutioning by PowerPoint, and why I think it's a really good, powerful tool to help you catch real, what I call meaty, substantive solutions that can then be inserted into the proposal.
Very comprehensive, Marina, as always. Marina, I think as in good old days, there was, the procurement cycle was slightly longer. So we used to do solution workshops and other things. So assuming that's still the case, will you do solution workshop just part of the capture process, document it, and then try to reflect that on the proposals as and when it arrives? Or would you do that as an ongoing process of solution iteration? What's the decision?
That's a really great question. And I would say it varies, right? It really varies. And this is where you kind of have to tailor to the situation. The first part of what you said is, so we do a lot of very large proposals for our clients. So the first type of proposal, I'm just going to use NASA as an example. NASA tends to have these, first of all, they issue draft RFPs very, very frequently, almost every time. And that you have 2 to 3 months on draft, and then the final comes out, you have another couple of months on final. So you have a really good sized timeline, right? So with a situation like that, I would say the voice of the customer definitely has to be in the capture process. Is because, once the RFP comes out, for sure, sometimes when the draft comes out, depending on the agency, the government goes into blackout, or at least brownout, so they will stop talking with you. So that information has to be captured before the RFP comes out. So that's the voice of the customer part, right? Now, if you are working on a large proposal like a NASA-like bid, where you have at least a draft and some time frame with a draft and then the final, I would say wait to solution until you get the draft, because the other thing that I kind of try to teach and preach is that you don't want to over solution, right? I like to do things in a very efficient and cost-effective manner. I understand that this is it's a very valuable exercise. It's also an expensive exercise. It's going to put a lot of smart, expensive people in the room or virtual room for some number of hours. It takes time. Solutioning takes time. So you only want a solution on the topics that are going to go into the proposal, right? You don't want a solution just for the sake of solutioning. So that way, on these large proposals, definitely wait till the draft comes out, and then solutioning becomes, in my opinion, a proposal activity, but very early on proposal activity. So that's answer number one. Then you have instances where, and we also support clients like that, where you have like task orders. Sometimes these task orders have like a 2-week turn, right? So the other big enemy of solutioning becomes this short timeline, right? How do you beat this timeline? So this is where you want to do the solutioning before the task order comes out, right? You want to do as much of it as possible in the capture phases. So how do you do that before knowing what the customer is going to ask for, right? Well, again, I'm going to push back and say voice of the customer, right? Analyze those keywords, understand the HUD buttons. And I guarantee you, and some of my customers, they think it's magic, but it's not. I can predict down to if there's scenarios or representative task orders. I'm going to say, okay, there's going to be one on this topic and one on this topic. So I can't tell them the exact verbiage, but the topics I can predict extremely accurately if I had interviewed the customers ahead of time, because the things that are keeping them up at night, the things that they perceive as risks, the things that they want to accomplish or they perceive as their goals, those are the things they're going to ask for, right? In those representative scenarios or representative task orders or questions within the RFP. That's what they're going to ultimately ask for. So voice of the customer, if analyzed correctly and if done thoroughly and comprehensively, will tell you a lot in terms of solution direction, even before the RFP comes out or the task order comes out. And the other part of it is, if you think you're going to have a management approach, like you're always going to need an organizational structure. Like you should think about how you're going to organize this contract, regardless of what the RFP says, right? Like it will give you so much more, like who does what is tied to the organizational structure. So even if you don't need to describe that, you still need to describe who does what. So there are certain topics that you should solution. Again, you need to understand how it's going to work on the contract, regardless of what the RFP will ask for. And it will absolutely plug into it, either in the staffing plan or the pricing, or there are multiple areas where it will drive those areas. The last thing I'll say is, even on the 2-week task order timeframe, if you have a task order and only 2 weeks to write the proposal, you have to adjust your entire proposal schedule. You may not have time to do your 3 formal color reviews and give the reviewers a whole day, or God forbid 2 days, to review, because then you have no time to write, right? So everything is going to have to be adjusted, but you still want to set aside some time up front to solutions. So I would say a day or 2, but in this situation, literally get the right people in the room and block off their time so that they're sitting there. And I know it's going to be a very tough, long day, but they sit that entire day, maybe day and a half, and they just talk through every part of what the RFP asks for and talk about truly what is it that we're proposing. Okay, not just, not just, we're proposing proven processes and exceptional resources, right? Like, what does that really mean? What is it that we're proposing, and really answer that question. And you know what? There may be an instance when and this is the hardest thing I'm going to say, and the hardest thing for people to understand and follow. There may be an instance where you get to this part and you can't come up with a solution. Perhaps you don't know enough about the customer. Perhaps you don't have the right experts in the room. Perhaps it's really not as core of your company's capability as you want to believe, So that's a flag right there. That should be telling you something. Perhaps you shouldn't be bidding in this job to start with. I had a client who came to me and said, hey, do you have any experts that can help us design a solution on XYZ topic? And I said, no, I don't have any experts that can help you design a solution on XYZ topics, but I have great proposal professionals who have written on the XYZ topic before, and they can interview your experts. So if you have, folks on other contracts that do XYZ, they can interview them, they can solution with them, they can facilitate that conversation, they can do it off hours if they're, doing their job, understandably during the working hours, that's not a problem. So, well, we really don't so much do that. And I was like, well, then why are you going after this work if that's not what you do? You shouldn't be going after this work and working on this proposal. You should be going after your core competencies. You should be going after plenty of other work that's out there that it is what you do, right? Anyway, so they actually got a little upset with me, went forward, proposed, lost, came back and said, you know what, you were right. And I said, yeah, I try to save you some money and help you redirect your BMP in a better direction. But some people just have to learn this lesson a little bit of a hard way. And I get that, and that's fine. But it is also a tool to help you determine maybe some things you shouldn't be going after.
As always, a lot of insights there. And as you rightly said, regardless of what the RFP says, whether you got the document, you should have a good idea about how are we going to deliver this contract? Who's the staff? What's the cost of running it? What are the technology that we're going to use? Transformation, buildings, etc., etc. Those things becomes the building blocks of your solution, whether you have the RFP or not. Do that and voice of the customer, as you rightly said. If you don't know the customer, if you don't know the pain points, why even bother to bid for this opportunity? Very powerful. Marina, the principles of solutioning, Marina, do you find, obviously we are talking in generic terms here, as you rightly said very early on, we are not focusing on a type of a tender here, we are focusing in generic terms, but just to segment it slightly further, Marina, in government, say federal tenders versus commercial tenders, do you find solutioning, there are any nuances of solutioning, or the general practices which you just mentioned now is applicable for both type of bids?
So I will start by giving you a full disclosure that in my particular business, the vast majority of my clients are federal government contractors. So I don't have as much hands-on experience supporting commercial bidders. We do have some commercial bidders that we do support, but that experience is just more limited. So now that I put my disclaimer in, I'll answer your question. So largely, I believe the process is the same, right? The biggest difference in our experience between federal government proposals and commercial proposals is the structure. You know, federal government RFPs are a lot more structured, a lot more rigorous, right? A lot more compliance-based. Commercial RFPs are a lot more flexible. You may not have page count limitations. You certainly don't have to comply with a FAR, you know, in the United States, for example, and things like that. So commercial proposals give you a lot more flexibility to describe things that you want to describe and talk about what you want to talk about. Now, this is a double-edged sword. The erroneous area that it can sort of push you towards is that you tend to want to talk about what you want to talk about, but you really need to talk about the stuff that the customer wants to talk about. So it becomes even more important from my perspective and my experience to understand your customers. If you're doing a commercial bid, it also becomes a lot easier to get to them and access them. So that voice of the customer still needs to be done. It's much more important, it's easier to obtain and plays a much more important role in the commercial proposals, right? The other thing that I see a lot in the commercial bids, they tend to be more product or offering oriented rather than services oriented, at least in my experience, like the federal government contracting is. So it's something that the company already has or grown a capability of. So it's a lot of reusable materials or canned stuff. And again, the issue we kind of unfortunately fall into if we don't do a solution, say, well, you know, we've written about, like, this is a product we offer. It's an offering that we do, you know, for all of our customers. We have a ton of proposals. We're just gonna, you know, clean it up, reshape it a little, you know, put this customer's name in it a few times, right, to tie it to them and send it in, right? What's the big deal? Well, again, the big deal is that it's not tailored to the goals of this customer, you know? And every customer looks at things differently. It really is, you know. I like to give an example of a purchase of a car, right? Let's say you go, again, it's one of those examples that, you know, pretty much everyone can relate to because most people buy cars in their lifetime. So, you know, you go to a dealership, and let's say it's even like a specific dealership, right? And you're looking at cars, and that car, I mean, you can say that you can sell that car the same way. Like, it has all the same features. It has all the same, I am not a car person, you know, like all the engine and all the specs. It has all the same specs, right? It has the same color and the same upholstery, the same everything, right? No matter if I come on the lot looking at it or if you come on the lot looking at it, right? So why wouldn't a car salesperson describe that car in the same way to me as he or she would to you, right? Valid question. Well, I will tell you why, because I have friends, a lot of them are male friends that are really big on, you know, going from 0 to 100 in 60 or 20 seconds, whatever it is, right? They're all about the engine and the power and how fast they can go and how loud it is. I have a neighbor on my street, like, we always know when his car is moving because everyone can hear his car, right? And then on top of that, he put in one of those horns, you know, from the truck. I'm like, why do you need this big horn, you know, other than to annoy us every once in a while? So when I go buy a car, I honestly can care less. You know, last time my husband and I kept arguing about, like, you know, V6 versus V8. And I said, why do I need V8? Like, I don't care about that. You know, what I really want is the heated seats. And oh, by the way, last time I got the heated steering wheel, and now it's pretty cold. And every time I get in my car, it gets so toasty, and I love it. I have my heated steering wheel, and I got my heated seats, and it's like my favorite thing, you know? And it talks back to me, and I talk to it, and I don't feel lonely. Those are the things that are important for me buying a car. My point is, the salesperson first needs to understand what it is that's important to me and what it is that's important to you. And based on that, their description of the same exact car should be different and tailored to what I want to buy versus what you want to buy. And if they just have a canned spiel, and the canned spiel accurately describes the car that we've just approached, it may or may not hit my HUD buttons. If they start talking about the engine power, they're going to lose me immediately. Like, I can honestly care less, right? Vice versa, there's some people that don't care what color the car is, or if they're heated seats or not, or my husband likes the cooling seats because he's always he's in the opposite place temperature wise from me, right? That's why we both need the dual climate control in both of our cars, otherwise we won't be able to ride together. My point is, it's really important to know voice of the customer. So even if you're working on the commercial bid, or even if you're selling a product and the product is exactly the same, you still want to propose it differently based on what the client, what's important to that client, what they want to buy. And that's the part that's really important to solution in that instance.
Wow, very, 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 very profound again, Marina. And also, as you rightly said, you have a lot more experience on the federal side than the commercial side, but the example is it's hit the spot where it's supposed to hit. But just to go deeper in the government, because that's your years of experience there. So there is a what, there is a who, there is a when, there is a how, and there is a why, and there is two more W's that people use. So government has a lot more questions than answers. In your opinion, how can we answer to all of these W's, and what do we do with that?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, I feel like. And, it's funny you asked that, because that's exactly what I preach, right? So again, one of the things I always say is we have to answer all of their questions in our proposal that they might have, right? Because unless you have like an orals or discussions, which I know some bids do have that, but not most, right? Your proposal is it. What they read in your proposal is what they learn about your offering or solution. There's no choice for them to come back and say, hey, I didn't quite get this part. Can you clarify this? Or can you drill in more on that? Or I understand how you're going to do it, but I don't get like who's going to do it, right? Or so they don't have a chance to ask these questions, and you don't have a chance to answer them. And the other thing that everybody forgets is that the way they evaluate proposals, they're comparing them side by side to other bids. So if the other bids paint that picture better or answer their questions, and in such a way that they, the answers are good, is what they want to hear, they're going to choose that other bid, right? So part of what you need to do as part of solutioning, and then ultimately it needs to get into the proposal writing, of course, is try to identify all of the questions that the government may have in their heads as they're reading it, right? So, the what, who, when, why, wow, and whatever else, where, all those W questions are really good boilerplate baseline questions that are excellent to use for the baseline, for the starting point, right? But what you need to do, again, voice of the customer comes in, you read the notes from the customer perspective, and you try to put yourself into their shoes, right? I am the procuring person who's looking for this service or this product. This is what's important to me. What would be important for me to know, right? So if we go back to the catering example I had before, right? Things like, what would the decorations look like? It's the color scheme, right? And, how many servers would I have, right? What would the menu look like? Other vegetarian options, right? So you come up with all the questions you can come up with from the customer perspective, because they're not going to have a chance to answer that, So the catering example, I actually use a lot of, and I actually just typically talk about like the steak and the seafood and giving people choices. And just on the spot, to be honest, completely honest with you, like as I'm answering your question today, I said, it's really funny. I always talk about the steak and the seafood, but I never consider the vegetarian people because I'm a meat eater myself. But the point is, there are people, and even like I have friends who are vegetarians, like I host parties, you have to consider it from the perspective of whoever it is that your audience is, right? Not just who you are. So there are a lot of people who the vegetarian options will be really important. There are some people who the meat stuff would be like the small amount of servings, right? And the vegetarian options would be the main sort of menu dish, right? And so you really have to remember that and keep that in mind. So you have to put yourself in the evaluator's shoes, right? And come up with those questions and get them answered. I act that way, actually. I actually do in this particular case what I preach. I have a lot of, my own BD meetings with potential new clients that interview my company, that will, come in and, potentially help them, with proposals or capture or whatnot, the services that we provide. And I always do that as I'm talking to them. Those meetings, almost 80 to 90%, they start with, hey, can you tell us a little bit about Smart BD and the services you provide? And it's kind of like this open-ended question that gives me an opportunity to do a little bit of my sales spiel, right, to a potential client. And as I'm talking, I'm always anticipating questions, right? Or the questions that have come up in the past, like how do we deal with OCI is a big question. So I want to tell them up front, right? So I don't, like, they don't have to think about it and answer them. And the more of these questions that I answer up front, that I anticipate, that I give them an idea about, right? They say, hey, this was great. This was so comprehensive. Like you thought, you clearly have thought of everything, you have this great design services model, and the truth of the matter is, like, it happened over time, right? It wasn't my first conversation that was like that. It happened over time, but a lot of it was built on the questions that people were asking me. So now I try to answer them ahead of time. So applying that to proposals, I think when the company is kind of new and starting up, there's going to be a lot of learning experiences, but it's also important to learn from your victories and your losses, right? Maybe you fell short explaining some area before in the past. Let's make sure that we strengthen our responses based on that question that the government had. There's a lot to be learned from discussions, or if there is best and final kind of activity that happens, right? Where the government provides ENs in the case of government contracting, and gives you an opportunity to address some of the preliminary weaknesses they've identified. You have to capture that knowledge and make sure you don't repeat those mistakes, especially if you're going to be doing a proposal for the same government customer again, whether it's adjacent work or 5 years down the road on the same proposal. But the point is, wherever you capture this information, try to anticipate the questions that they will have in their head, and answer them. Another good tool to anticipate the questions is external reviews, right? Because at one point, when you do the solutioning and perhaps work with a first draft and read it a few times, you become too close, right? You can no longer see clearly. So you can't anticipate those questions so much. And another thing that happens, if you're in the solutioning room, again, whether it's virtual or physical war room or whatnot, and having these conversations, and you think through everything, right? And then you have a picture in your head. But if you don't get every detail of that picture on paper and you still have it in your head, your brain fills in the gaps between the parts that are in paper, and you think it's really well described. But when somebody fresh who wasn't in that room with you, sort of marinating in all this for months and baking this baby until the baby came out, they read it, they have all these questions because it's not on paper, so they don't know the answers. So that's a really good checkpoint, right? To have a review, to bring in an external reviewer and pay attention to what they're asking for. And sometimes I see people get really defensive in their reviews and say, well, it's in there, it's in there. Well, if it was in there, they wouldn't have this question. So maybe it's in there in your head, maybe it was meant to be in there, but maybe it's not in there as clearly as you think if this external reviewer didn't read it or see it, and even if it's in there and his or her eyes glazed over it, maybe it's not jumping out enough, but it won't jump out enough to the evaluator either. So make it pop, make it stand out, make it more clear, put it in a call out box, put it in bold italics, whatever, right? Because it's an important point. So those are the types of things that I think will help answer the questions and come up with the right question.
I think this is, as always, is very powerful. It's not only anticipating the hot buttons and the issues that the customer might have, also anticipate the questions that they might ask you in addition to what they will ask you in the RFP. The more questions you have, the more you can demonstrate that you thought it through, and it's super powerful, Marina. So just going back to the topic, no fluff, only bluff, bottom line upfront. Bottom line upfront, that's a cool word. Talk us through what the bottom line upfront is.
Yes, so what's the bottom line upfront? So I will end our great podcast with the beginning of each proposal, right? The beginning of each proposal is either an executive summary or an introductory section of sort if the RFP doesn't ask for an executive summary. But at the end of the day, you always want to have the first page or two max, kind of summarizing and preparing and explaining to the evaluators, this is what you get when you get us being a team. This is what you get with our solution. This is what you get with our offering. This is what you get with our services. This is what you get with our product, whatever the case may be, right? And then the rest of the proposal that follows is the details behind it, right? So this is like your little elevator speech. This is the part where, now evaluators should read it and they want to read more. Like you should have that evaluator on that first page or two max, right? So that's the bottom line up front. So very many proposals say, we put together a stellar team and we've gathered proven, robust processes, and we have this comprehensive infrastructure we rely on, and we'll bring you exceptional resources, and ultimately that results in the best value and a lowest risk solution possible. All wonderful things. And I dare you find a client who's not going to want any of these things, regardless of whether it's commercial or government, what they do, what industry they work in, what government agency they work in, right? Everybody wants all those wonderful things, best value, low risk, fantastic processes, exceptional people, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't tell them what the hell it is that they're buying. So if you're reading that paragraph or that page or whatever it is, and you can't figure out if it's an IT proposal or facilities management proposal, that's a problem. That's a red flag, right? Tell them what it is that you're proposing. Tell them why us. Just tell them. Perhaps you bringing in some management approaches and automation that's going to help them, streamline the management of the contract, cut the PMO by half and realize cost savings, because maybe that's what they want to achieve, right? Perhaps you're going to help them implement a new software development approach. So if they've done waterfall, you're going to take them to agile, which is going to help them go from 2 major releases a year to 12 monthly releases, 12 releases a year, and therefore they can get the features out to the users a lot faster. Again, it's tangible, it's specific, it describes what it is that you bring to the table. It doesn't take so much space with so many, because a lot of people say, well, we don't have the space up front in that one page to provide all the details. Absolutely true. You don't. That's not where the description will go. That's not where the big broad picture will go. That's going to be further down. But you have to have enough nuggets to substantively and succinctly say, this is bottom line up front. This is bottom line, why us? This is what we bring that's tangible benefits. This is what we're going to give you, tangible benefits. This is how we're going to get you to your end state, tangible benefits. And the details are in the proposal that follows. So that's the bottom line up front. And in all of our solutioning sessions, we actually have them, one of the initial slides or sometimes one of the closing slides that says it's the BLUF slide, right? This is the bottom line up front. This is what we're offering. This is what we're bringing to the table. Is this the right thing? Is this the right thing that the customer wants to buy? Are they buying a red car that's sporty with a great engine? Or are they buying an incredible GPS system, voice activated with heated seats? Could be the same car. You know what I'm saying? But two different customer sets.
Correct.
So putting the bottom line up front, telling them what it is that you're going to bring to them, getting them interested in reading the entire proposal. That's what that means. But it has to be meaty. It has to be substantive. It cannot be fluffy. Otherwise, it's just not going to win.
What an amazing finish there. I think, thank you, Marina. I think what we talked about in this short an hour is about solutioning. Regardless whether solution is part of your proposal process or not, whether it's asked in the question set or not, do that. Regardless whether it's a timeline driven, whether you have 3 months to do it or 3 days to do it, add it part of your process. We talked about the issues like lack of subject matter experts. We talked about the lack of solutioners, facilitators, but we also talked about the lack of time. And we also addressed how we can fix those issues and how we can improve the bottom line upfront, as you call it. So it's brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure listeners will enjoy it. And since we did in a video format, people who like to see us face to face also got that experience as well. So thank you, Marina, for taking your time and sharing your thoughts. Maybe in the next episode, we can go deeper into the voice of the customer, which you just mentioned. Looks like that's an interesting initiative, and we can go deeper on that so that the listeners can also understand solutioning is one, voice of customers here, but how can we bring it both together? You gave an overview in this talk. Maybe we'll do that deeper in the next talk, but that's it. Now, take care, and thanks for joining. Stay healthy, continue to inspire everybody, and looking forward to have more and more episodes with you, Marina. Stay healthy.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me as always, and happy to do this again in the future.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchyscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundram,
signing off.